T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Midheaven Podcast. This might be our spookiest episode yet. Outside
Need
of
an extra beer for this one?
Yeah.
I looked at the chart and I was like, I'm gonna put an extra shot in my drink. Fuck.
Well, shout out to Hades. This is all her domain. So. It's gonna be lit. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be horrifying.
Guys, I know that you're like, it's September. What are we doing? Is this coming out in September? Probably. I don't even know anymore. September, October-ish.
Yeah.
But we are now within like a month of eclipse season, so we wanted to kind of, like get ahead of the curve, talk to you guys a little bit about the solar eclipse in Scorpio that's coming in hot on October 25th, 2022. Obviously, you guys know eclipses come in pairs, so if it wasn't for eclipses, we wouldn't have major shifts and changes. That kind of cleans out the cosmic fridge. We see new beginnings and endings happening in eclipses. They come roughly every 6 months, and they come in pairs. Usually we have about 4 a year. Sometimes we'll have 5, just depending on the lineup and where the nodes are. And this is going to be a solar eclipse, so it's going to be very action-packed in the sign of Scorpio.
Yeah.
2 degrees, Sun, Moon, and Venus.
That's a Taurus degree?
In Scorpio. And it's a Venus Cazimi.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So yeah, Venus in detriment. Square Jupiter, Mars being the ruler, Mars square
Fall,
Neptune.
dignity, detriment. I love that.
Yeah. And it also squares Pluto by about 7 degrees. So both the traditional ruler Mars, square Neptune, is kind of wacky. Quincunx Pluto, and then Pluto square.
So no one's gonna know what's happening while it's happening. I get the sense. Like, we'll think we'll know, but then we'll look back on that's what was happening. I feel like people like you will know though. I feel like since you have Pluto and Sun there, you'll be aware while everyone else is just like thinking they know.
It's gonna be food crisis. Crisis is Scorpio, and it's in a food degree, and it's also at a 2, so it deals with Taurus and
the culmination of all the shortages that have happened. Probably kind of
chaos in financial markets, and
I kind of have the vision of just like a black abyss. Like Virgo and Libra bring us to the edge, and now it's just like pitch black, just like
falling off a cliff.
Shit, this is it.
I mean, the eclipses usher in change, so I think that's the positive. And like a new moon solar eclipse, it's a new moon on steroids. But when we're dealing with eclipses, things are being eclipsed out, so something is hidden and it's coming to light, and just a very, very, very active time, really between the 25th and like the 8th of November, because that's going to be bookend with will be a Taurus lunar eclipse, which generally is pretty positive, right? A lunar eclipse in Taurus is, the moon's in its exaltation, but that's going to be oppose Venus and square Saturn. So likely we're seeing in the days leading up to this, if you guys saw our Libra season episode, we talked about how there was like lots of just like imbalance and things that weren't fair, and like legal issues and like conflict in regards to like health and relationships. So then the eclipse is like, and here we go. It's like starting things that are new. So like, even though new moons are about like, positive new seeds of intention, on one hand, this is pretty fucking gnarly because it makes me feel like new things arise from being courageous and fearless and willing to kind of upend things. But we don't want to wait for crisis to push us into making changes.
Too late.
Right? So...
No, true that.
So there's that.
I think the positive is that we sowed seeds, the new moon in Taurus, and now we're finally harvesting and completing the seed sown. Leo season with the new moon sprouted those seeds out the ground, and now we're finally harvesting the north node crops. So the positive of that is finally seeing what it looks like, being able to now, through Aquarius season, harvest and reap them. So that will show market growth and development. It's just all that development is going to be used towards this next dark chapter.
It's like going to be a bloodbath in the markets, basically. That's
with the oppositions too, yeah.
Yeah, and like I've thought for some time looking at this that like the euro is just totally gonna fucking flip out, and then like a bunch of people are gonna panic and try to figure out where they're gonna put their money. And obviously, if stuff's going down in like Asia or Europe, it's gonna affect the U.S. markets too. I don't think anybody's gonna get off scot-free, but.
Well, that's interesting because now that you mention that, that makes me think this could be the unexpected push towards a digital currency or.
Well, it's square Pluto.
Yeah.
It's a soft square, but there's nothing soft with Pluto. So, softcore porn, maybe. It's still porn. You're still getting fucked.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm a future softcore porn director, so that's why everybody. OnlyFans coming soon.
Hey, lady,
Yeah.
you gotta make porn for ladies too.
Director,
We
not
like
actor, director.
we like porn with a storyline.
That's the type of movie, yeah. I'm gonna focus more on the storyline than the porn. Get some costumes in. Cut.
I feel like maybe it's me, but like the last couple eclipses, I mean, when we had eclipses in the fall last year, it was not a good situation for me. But I'm a Scorpio, so I was like, everything's going to shit. And then the full moon eclipse happened in Taurus, and I was like, okay, new phase, you know? So it's gonna be different for everybody. Obviously, if you have any planets within 0 to like, let's say like 4 or 5 degrees of Scorpio, like find a rock, hide your kids, hide your wife. And if you have any planets 0 to about 4 degrees of the fixed signs, so Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, samesies, because you're gonna get the square. If we go by traditional standards and we look at Mars being the ruler of this, we got Mars in Gemini, which is super dodgy. It's getting ready to station because it's going to go retrograde in a couple days. And it's in a square to Neptune. And it's also quincunx Pluto. Oh boy. Every time I look at this chart, my palms get sweaty because I'm just like,
I love the feel of it because, 6 months prior to a cycle, you start to feel it. So like 6 months from this point, Pluto's going to be in Aquarius, Saturn's going to be in Pisces, Jupiter's going to be in Aries. So like this is the trigger point that's going to lead us there. It's the domino effect of actions that's going to lead us to what's happening. And I like Candace's approach to speaking about this because we can hear you reflecting the rest of us. I really don't feel like we'll even really know what we're headed into. Like we'll really think we do. And the Scorpio trines to Neptune will lead us and guide us all dreamily too. But I think the key to the Scorpio season is Mars and Gemini, the 8th house to it. And how
changing our mind, changing the way we communicate.
Complete transformation of how we act off our thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be starting to see the truth in light of new hidden information. And we'll look back at the past few years like, oh, okay, this is more what's been happening. And I think the Uranian opposition is like the sudden revelation of all of this. So it might not give people enough time to act, but I think other than Mars and Gemini, I'm really curious about the quincunx to Jupiter. Because that's also really interesting, Like,
so I'm a Scorpio, I have an Aries moon, and I'm
Right.
super fascinated by the quincunx or the inconjunct because it's just, I mean, in general, just the aspect, right?
Yeah.
But looking at it from Aries to Scorpio, the quincunx, the inconjunct, it's more than an opposition, less than a trine. So you're kind of in no man's land, and they make this funky aspect to each other where they're rubbing each other the wrong way. So you see it with all of the signs have these angles. Both ruled by Mars. Aries being more combative and me first and independent and rushing and pioneering, and Scorpio being more cool, calm, collected, calculated, being like, no, you don't just haul off and stab somebody. Like, you have to have a plan. Like, You know what I'm saying? Like, it's more like mobster.
How are you gonna get rid of the body?
Yeah. So it's very art of war. So I think that just having all of that Mars energy compounded and in conjunct, for me, the way that I've felt this energy throughout this last year with the squares to my Mars, with Jupiter's been square to my Mars, has been me being like, do I blow up now or do I blow up later? Like, do I do it right now or do I just like keep cool until the right moment and then I'm just gonna like lose my shit?
But will you even be able to control it with the Uranus opposition?
Yeah. I'm trying. Yeah, Saturn square my Mercury sun,
Right.
so I'm being very careful and calculated with like what I say to who and when.
Yeah.
But I feel like when you're dealing with that quincunx, it's like, do you get violent and reactionary and you start something or start a riot or start a problem, or do you decide that you're just gonna like go run off and you're gonna get fearful or you're gonna get vengeful or you're like eclipses like this is how villains are made. I'm just gonna come out and say it. Like literally.
I'm
like,
kicking out villain eras right now. That's been a huge thing. Yeah. I love that. And actually, I shouldn't say I love that, but like that's very interesting because I think it could happen to people who, Lisa, you could be watching this now like, well, they can't be talking about me, and it's you that's kicking off this villain era. You know what I mean? So
I think this is wholeheartedly kicking off my villain era. The eclipse is on my Mars, which is my 7th house lord, and it's gonna quincunx Jupiter exactly on my descendant. So I'm just gonna, I already kind of know, like, I kind of have an idea of how that's gonna go down, just like who I'm gonna have conflict with and like whatever, and I'm just kind of like, whatever, fuck it. Like, it's, for me, it's detaching from feeling like the bad guy, you know, and like not giving a fuck at like what people think, and like if I'm the bad guy because I'm standing up for myself.
that's how I've been feeling now. So it's nice to see that will be like the huge crescendo climax acceptance speech, like, hairy bitches, I'm out here. I like Mercury that's creeping up behind the Scorpio eclipse.
What about the fact that Venus is in the mix? Like, you've got Venus in its detriment. You've got Venus in a Mars sign. Venus conjunct the eclipse, so it's gonna highlight something about women, about femininity, about reproductive rights, about investments, about taxes, death, inheritance, like blood, guts, and all of that Scorpio stuff. Like, Venus is not happy when she's in Scorpio because she's basically in hell.
And we've seen on the other end with Mars and Gemini, especially with the release of She-Hulk. She-Hulk has been super controversial.
Really?
Yeah, because a lot of people, men and women, of course, you have supporters, you have detractors, and the criticisms of it with men and women is huge. Like, they're pushing this huge toxic feminine narrative as far as like the show is basically another show of making the men incompetent and stupid and chauvinistic, and
well, they are,
and how women are good at doing everything the first time.
Come on. But when it's Batman or Superman or Spider-Man and you all have all these like whores sucking dick in skirts and glasses, it's okay.
And also, so please vocalize that. And also, you know, the whole notion that, you know, women, because it's not so much that, it's so much more so that you're introducing women characters that are just so good at everything they do. And if you're a woman, that you're just going to excel at everything.
They create conflict and contrast. To put the woman on the pedestal, they gotta kick men down a peg, and vice versa. They do the same thing for male superheroes.
Well, that's the thing. And not to say that, because I can see clearly how what's happening in this is a backlash to how it used to happen before. Like, it's really a commentary of, okay, men used to be put in this position, now we're highlighting women in this position, talking, you know, kind of reversing it.
I have a hunch.
But
go ahead,
just
I'll let
that,
you finish.
No, it's all good. But just that narrative, you know, between the men and the women, between this, I feel like the Venus and Scorpio is gonna take that Virgo square and bring it to a huge climax.
I think we're going to see a lot of stuff about trans rights.
Yes.
Because Mars is in a mutable double-bodied sign, and it's in a square to Neptune, and you see the sun and the moon, which is masculinity and femininity coming together, conjunct Venus going, well, sex and gender is changeable, right? And it's something...
It's something
that can be changed or transformed or manipulated or edited
or fluid or whatnot,
snipped or whatever. Like, whatever. There's gonna be something there. I also wonder if this is
I
going to
love
be
that you
about
mentioned
like
that.
military and like
Yeah.
women in the military.
Or trans in the military.
Or trans in the
Yeah.
military, or like whether or not you can identify as a woman but
Absolutely.
technically be born a man but serve with like women. Like I say military because of the inconjunct to Jupiter, right? And this is going to be about personal rights in regards to reproductive stuff, Scorpio, but also debt, inheritance, taxes, personal taxes, examining and looking at personal taxes. But I actually think this is going to be about our rights personally in friction when it comes to new regulations with money.
Absolutely. And we have to look at the cycle of these things, because I love that you brought up the trans movement, because I think the Scorpio eclipse, and when I speak on the trans movement, I speak on it as how impactful it will mean for other movements. Because a lot of people don't know that the trans movement is like a landmark case for all the other movements that are going to follow in its case. It's like everyone's watching what happens with trans people, because if it works with them, there's so much more that it can apply to.
Women's rights,
So
gay
much more.
rights, like
And now-
individual rights.
and now
People
that
don't
you
realize.
And now that you mention women's rights and gays' rights, you know what I'm saying? There's that splinter between certain women rights feminists and trans. Like, we're starting to see this civil war like break out. It's not necessarily open, but these things come in. Case in point, you know what I'm saying? First of all, I'm transphobic because I'm not interested in dating trans women, and I had to accept that about myself. I didn't know that made me transphobic. But the other thing here is, technically, and this is not a joke. This is not a joke. I can talk about abortion because I can get pregnant. And this is now bringing things to a head, but based on what things people are saying versus things people agree with, and all this is going to come to a head. Like, okay, what's right, what's not right? Because the same people saying that you can basically, men can get pregnant are the same people saying if you're a man, don't talk about pregnancy. And that's going to reach ahead, and it should reach ahead, because, I feel like women are being disserviced through all this. And I'm not trying to cape for women, because it's not like men are worse or men or women are better, but I feel like it's really just fucking over the women who, y'all are the reason why these people have had these movements. Let me not say these people, but like everyone involved, white, black, Asian, the feminine equation in this, I feel, is the one getting the short end of the stick, even being pandered to, even, having this agenda kind of come around. And I think this eclipse is going to really bring all that to a head and create this super shit show that shows that, we never really agreed on most things. We were just kind of like sweeping it under the rug, and now we have to deal with it all.
Gemini is youth
Yeah.
in some situations too. And so I'm looking at like Mars being the dispositor of the Sun, Moon, and Venus ruled by Scorpio. And you got Mars that's in a square to Neptune. So I'm wondering, like, how is this impacting sexual education in elementary schools?
so
How is
true.
this affecting the conversations revolving around what can and cannot be factual that's being talked about in the media in regards to women's rights?
How does it affect all the children being pulled out into homeschooling?
Well, but also, like,
The 2 million kids.
this agenda, and I'm just being honest, like, I mean, it's sensitive. I'm always really careful about, like, trans stuff and, like, anything in regards to gay rights. I mean, I support those movements. Like, I feel like people should be free to do whatever they want to do in the privacy of their own homes. Like, if it's not infringing on my life, I don't care. If you want to be a man and get pregnant, do your own thing. If you want to wear a wig and a dress, have at it.
If you want to chest feed, that's not my business. Like, that's
No,
between you and your partner.
but if I'm paying taxes potentially to send my children to school, and you're teaching children about gay sex and talking about gender changing and hormonal changes and gender reassignment in a school that is technically like a public school, like,
For
I'm gonna have a problem with
children.
that.
For children.
Because these are children. I mean,
Even
maybe
if you
it's-
told them straight stuff, I'd have a problem with that.
Maybe it's just me. Like, I know there are some little kids that are 4, 5, 6 years old fucking doing the sachet, and they
Yeah,
know
oh,
they're
yeah.
gay, and that's great. I
Right.
love it. Like, I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
I have a problem with kids who are intentionally being preyed upon,
Who are innocent, naive,
who
groomed.
come from broken families or underprivileged areas, who are being manipulated into thinking that I don't know where I belong, so maybe I'm a girl, so I'm going to go through some kind of like gender reassignment that can't be undone. Like, to me, that's kind of like, what the fuck is
It's
going
demonic,
on? Like,
it's
why are
evil,
they
it's
trying
horrible.
to create problems right now?
And you know who this really fucks over? Gay people and trans people. Because with these narratives out here, you start looking at trans people like, why would you want this to happen? And most trans people, most gay people, they're not on that shit. Like, they'll tell you too, we don't want these people indoctrinating kids like that.
No,
so
they don't.
they're using these people for their plight, for what they're going through, just to pander.
But a lot
and
of
make all this,
people
like,
who have gone through having to come out of the closet
Mm-hmm.
and gone through having to tell family members that they're trans, they'll tell you it's not an easy road. Like, it has never been glorified the way that it is today in the
Right.
media. So it's like a lot of those people had to go through
Right.
trials and tribulations to get to that point to be like, yeah, I did it, and I did it in my own way. And like, a lot of them will say, like, I wouldn't wish this on anybody because
Facts.
it's really difficult and it's got a long road to finding yourself. And like, a lot of those people lose the support of their families, or they end up homeless, or they have a whole slew of other issues they have to deal with. I feel for them.
And trans representation, I feel like what you see on television and social media as who the trans person is not the average or regular trans person. Let me not say regular, but I feel like there's what you're being showed gay and trans people are, and then what like the actual LGBTQ is. Like real people who have real issues, who don't really sensationalize this, and then you're making it look like one way, and it's hurting the people who actually feel more vulnerable sharing it.
There's going to be money in this, okay? Like,
Huge money.
if there's politics behind this, saying that they're supporting talking about pronouns and all of, I'm sorry, I know I sound super ignorant, but if they're pushing this, talking about pronouns and all this other shit, and also talking to the media, telling the media and telling the public, like, we want to create programs for some of these gender reassignments, you got to ask yourself, what's the end goal here? Because
Really?
Venus in Scorpio and the moon in Scorpio and the sun in Scorpio is putting a highlight on crime, manipulation, taking advantage of things, where people are making money in the shadows and nobody knows what's really going on. This all quincunx Jupiter. So there's going to be laws and things that are going to come out about some of this stuff, and also taxes, investments, cryptocurrencies, whatever, that's benefiting shadow governments or shadow groups or the medical industry, because they realize probably they've tapped the market for vaccines, so now they're going to jump to the next fucking thing, right?
Which is their job. This is business.
And
That's kind of what they're meant to do.
Mars is in a square to Neptune. So this is also telling me that it's really important to know where your information is coming on some of these topics. Follow the money, okay? Because Mars squares Neptune.
Yeah,
So it's saying that, like, there's going to be things that are spoken about, talked about, programs that are put out there, things that are put on TV that is intentionally misleading and drawing your attention away from how much money somebody made, whether or not they didn't pay taxes, whether or not they're actually getting involved in inside trading. Like, there's going to be some slimy shit from this eclipse.
Oh,
I think that the strongest aspect is probably the Venus Cazimi, second to the quincunx to Jupiter.
Yeah.
And if individuals wake the fuck up with that in conjunct, they can realize that we are in the process of probably one of the biggest financial heists
Easily. Easily. Oh, yeah.
ever.
And by
Ever.
the time people realize it, it will be too late. But it's that kind of realization that creates a catalyst for what should have been done years ago, war. But other than that, you know, the representation issue, the Asian community, the black community with BLM, the trans community, gay community with LGBTQ, you have this like, even the Caucasian community, like every single community where politics have infiltrated, you have this whole thing where there's a large majority of these groups that are not being vocalized if they go against the narrative of these political agendas. They want you to see, oh, this is what Black Lives Matter. These are all the black people here. These are all the trans people here. Meanwhile, you have trans people speaking against that. You have black people speaking against BLM. They silence those voices.
Because specific, I'm going to say minority groups, it doesn't matter if you're a person of color or if you're, you know, transgender, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're not white, I hate to say that, but like, that's just what it is right now. They're going to realize that dividing and conquering and like stirring up certain groups and then making it trendy and getting all of these big companies online to sign off on, we're donating to proceeds, we're changing our user icon to support this group, is only just continuing the divisive, confrontational
Yeah.
tendencies because they want the sheep to just go along with whatever the status quo is.
And then even worse, to double compound that, instead of coming into a real practical solution, a lot of what we're seeing is this extra demonization on white people to who aren't even really responsible for what's happening, which doesn't help anything, because like minority groups do need like and I hate to call them minority groups, but like the minority groups do have a message to say as far as inclusivization, but the way that it's being gone about to just demonize white men for being white
I don't agree with that.
white women for being
And
white
this is an
women.
interesting debate. I don't agree with that.
Well, because, okay, and I need to hear your perspective. I think this is amazing that we're arguing like this. This is amazing. But like from my perspective, I really do feel like it's crazy growing up. Like we grew up to learn about slavery and to see the inequalities, which are real. I will not doubt that there have always been inequalities between, you know, certain racial differences between, especially white, black people and people of color. But what in my opinion we're seeing here is a pushback that's not being done in integrity, where we're now like almost demonizing and making, like, I don't feel like white men are the new black men. I don't feel like white men are going through any crazy like discrimination that other people went through, but I feel like there's a demonization of white men now that everyone's extra woke. That's not authentic. It doesn't really help the situation. It's just like, oh, you're a white cisgender heterosexual male. Now, at the same time, that's not to say that that's happening for no reason. People aren't pointing the finger at them for no reason, but it's being done in a way that doesn't see people for who they are, and it's almost like the reverse of racism. But I know it's not just that, and I'm actually interested to hear your perspective.
Well, I think on one hand, from my experience, I mean, I grew up in an all-white community. You know, like I grew up in Arizona. Like I didn't see a black person until I was 12 years old. I didn't. Even though I grew up in Arizona, relatively close to the border, I didn't see a lot of other ethnicities. It wasn't really until I moved to Southern California.
I was born in Phoenix, by the way, but I moved to New York at 1.
Okay,
so, yeah,
well, so you got diversity real early on. You're a citizen of the world at that point.
Yo, that's wild.
From what I've seen, I feel like I've seen more true, genuine racist individuals that are racist against their own race than polar races. Like I've seen white people who are more racist against white people, and I've seen black people who can be more racist against black people.
Can I speak on that? So my mom, who worked in Staten Island for like basically my whole childhood, when we moved to New York and moved to New Jersey, she worked at Staten Island, and what she would always tell me was she was fascinated that first of all, black people would be racist to her, but also she would see like the Italians be racist against the Irish. Yeah. And like that whole like, you know, discrimination.
Yeah. I mean, and black on black crimes is a thing. If you look at major metropolitan cities, it's a thing.
And when I say black people be racist to black people, her as an African versus people who were like American born, like there was that clash. Like she couldn't wrap her mind around.
And that's not me saying white people can't be racist towards black people or vice versa. They can be. It's a thing. But when I think about it, I also like look at across the board where like there are a lot of white people who are like, oh, I'm woke. I support black communities. I support certain causes, or I buy from certain brands that support them. But like, what the fuck have you ever done to actually really help people of color? Ever? When have you ever stood up in public and defended somebody who was being, you know, like cast out because of this color of their skin? Like, not a lot of people really do things for those individuals. And secondly, you hear a lot of white people that are like, oh, you're saying you want, you know, reparations for whatever from slavery times, or, you know, you say that because we had to endure this culturally that the white men have to pay and it's their fault and blah, 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 blah. Like, and then you see white people that are like, well, I wasn't born then, so why is this my problem? Right. Passing the buck generationally as a white person, being like, okay, I wasn't around when they were doing that, so how is that my problem, is the reason why we're in this situation right now. And I think that a lot of it is acknowledging that people of color across the board, whether you're black, Native American, if you came from other countries, whatever, like, you guys were given the shit end of the stick. So until we balance things out now and focus on how to make things fair across the board, not just in a sense of race, but also like economic class.
Right.
You can make 6 figures as a black man, but you can be living in a fucking trailer park as a white person. And in a lot of ways, I'm not saying it's the same, but the new form of slavery is this new economic breakdown and like total destruction that's gone on that's ruining all of the social classes. So now we're not separated and segregated based off of our ethnicity and the color of our skin, but now it's about how much money we make.
Yep. It doesn't matter what color you are.
So when white people start fucking getting the shit end of the stick because, you know, now there's a lot more poor white trash, black people are going to be like, what's up? We've been here forever. You know, like now you know what it's like. It's forcing through these Aquarian transits to be like, it doesn't matter what color our skin is. Like we have to figure out a way of being able to fight this. And I think that white people do need to take responsibility for right now. It doesn't matter if you weren't around 200 years ago. You have to acknowledge that there is indifferences and imbalances, and it needs to be fixed.
And so I 100,000% agree with that. I think personally the execution of that in some channels, because some people are doing it right, but some people are taking it overboard and they're just demonizing white people who don't bow to the narrative, which isn't entirely accurate, because everything you said definitely is true. Like that needs to be acknowledged, that needs to be moved forward. But just seeing in the media, like, you know, this superficial sense of movies being color swapped with black actors just to get representation, a lot of that more is just because Nielsen realized that black people have a lot of consuming power. So they want black people to be more represented in media, to feel more inclusive, to spend more money. So, you know, that shouldn't come at the cost of another race. And I don't mean it like that as far as like, because the other side of this is there still are racist people, especially racist white people who have like these backwards views. I don't want to necessarily dismiss that that's not a thing, that there aren't people backwards, but I think there's a lot more Caucasian white people or just people in general who are off that. They're not racist. You know what I mean? Like they're not necessarily prejudiced like that either, and they're just kind of being swept into this thing just because they're white. You know what I'm saying? And this happening to black people is happening to Asian people too. I think now it's kind of coming out of color and more into narrative. Like you're being discriminated against if you follow one narrative versus another narrative. And it's kind of uniting things. But
I feel like also when we see oppositions in squares to Neptune, we've seen genocide, we've seen slavery, we've seen civil war, you know? And so now that we're watching Mars come into this square with Neptune that's perfecting, and then it'll retrograde back, it's where, you know, some of the hot talking points, I think, in the media are going to be, you know, who is being discriminated against and who is being... You know, and it's all of this is 8th house to Scorpio. And so it's definitely going to be really, really colorful, because I think you're going to hear more about sex workers, more about people who aren't paying their taxes, more about trans stuff, insurance, scams, and...
It might just be the unvaccinated getting discriminated.
To some extent, though, recently, I mean, just the fact that they've come out with stuff in recent weeks being like, hey, like, we're going to consider vaccinated and unvaccinated people literally the same. Like, that huge win for the unvaccinated community, for people who held the ground and they were like, no, I'm not going to do it. There's still a lot more that needs to come from this. And I think that it may take really up until the Saturn-Neptune in Aries to see the full repercussions of how that's physically affected the well-being and the health of individuals. But if it's not one thing, it's another. And I look at this and I'm like, now it's going to be an attack on our money. Because it is Scorpio, so it does deal with taxes and debt and money owed. And I think a lot of people are going to realize that the direction that we're going in the future in the United States is we will move away from a system where we are paying taxes monthly out of our paychecks, or we are paying taxes quarterly or annually. We are going to start seeing taxes taken immediately out of things. When you make a purchase, out of an account, whatever. And on one hand, you've got the sun, moon, Venus, that's in a square to Pluto by about, 6 degrees. And on the other hand, and I guess I should just say on that, intense exchanges in regards to power and money and sex and greed and all of that stuff. But then you've also got a slight trine by about 7 degrees to Mars and Gemini. So it's really still highlighting this theme of like, talk about it. If something's a problem, bring it up, put it out there, share it with the world, highlight it, put a spotlight on it. And I don't think we're going to see the real true effects of this until the South Node goes through these degrees of Scorpio. And just the bookend eclipse for this, it's in 2 weeks, is that's where the floor falls out.
I think a major seed being sowed that you just said that blew my mind is for sure one of the most major sexual revolutions ever, especially with Pluto Scorpio, Pluto Sag, Pluto Libra, and maybe young Pluto Caps, where, you know, the demystification of prostitution is amongst us, where it will no longer be taboo to just outright pay someone for sex. This is going to be mainstream in our culture. And the success of platforms like OnlyFans, which is beautiful because as much stigma as OnlyFans gets, OnlyFans is not new. OnlyFans has been around for years. It just was called different things. It's just OnlyFans was the one that got popular because of the pandemic. And this has demystified a lot of how less apprehensive people are selling their sexuality. And I'm not here to argue whether it's right or wrong, because none of that shit matters. The fact of the matter is, we're going to see millions of more people be so much less stigmatized and taboo in the decriminalization of prostitution, in paying for sex, in freely expressing sex out of the taboo that Pluto Scorpio kind of intensified. So
the quincunx to Jupiter in Aries is also just really exploring and realizing that there is some sense of the physical body needs a connection, right? It needs something. It needs to explore something. It needs to have that freedom. So yeah, sexual revolution, but I mean, maybe it's just me. Like, I don't really care. I think if a bunch of people got through the pandemic and made money and paid off mortgages and shit using like...
Just no one's business.
Who gives a fuck? That's their hustle. Yeah. And like, you're going to call those people whores and that they're whoring themselves on the internet, but like, some of those people literally were taking care of their families. Yeah. How is that any different than whoring yourself out for a corporate job that you absolutely hate, that you're selling your soul for, making a ton of money for somebody else and being totally miserable?
And everyone's different. Like, you know, my whole thing with the whole sex work thing is don't be out here looking sloppy. Don't be out here fucking for $40 in the club.
It's the oldest profession in history.
No love. It's the oldest.
It's the oldest profession in history. That's how some cities were. That's how some cities in the Southwest were born as a result of brothels.
Astrologically, astrology supports this too, because Taurus is material value and Scorpio is sex. You're not having sex until you give off a Taurus. That's just how it works. So like, it's the oldest profession for a reason. It's not necessarily that it's wrong. My whole thing is how you conducting your business. Don't sell your shit for like cheap. You know what I mean? Like, have respect and integrity in how you go about anything you do. But it's such a very important conversation, because especially as a man in this day and age, that's the new conversation. Like, would you date someone with an OnlyFans? Would you marry someone that does sex work? And I look for character. You know what I'm saying? Like, if someone doesn't do sex work, but they have a shitty character, I'm going to marry someone that has a brilliant character but does sex work versus someone that has a shitty character but doesn't do sex work. But, you know, these are very Scorpio-esque, complex, South Nodal themes that are materializing in Taurus in a new commodity and way to literally just, with Pluto and Cap, dead the old traditions. And I think this is going to shock so much people because, you know, we're going to step into, post this eclipse, things that most people would never expect to see happen in culture, but now it's mainstream.
Yeah.
So that'll be really exciting.
Yeah, just the square to Pluto. I mean, hold on to your shorts. Some major power struggles over art, assets, currency, taxes. You know, I think the moon is the collective. So the fact that the sun and the moon come together conjunct Venus, a lot of people are going to realize we need food, we need money, we need things, and some kind of crisis revolving around that. And Yeah, just the bookend. I mean, you know, everybody's like, oh, you're going to hear some astrologers like, this is an eclipse conjunct Venus. It's so magical. Like, fucking kidding me? Like, Venus is like Carrie standing there with a knife in her hand and blood all over her.
Or Carol Baskin's.
Oh, yeah. So it's going to be the darker side of Venus. And then 2 weeks later with a full moon eclipse that's going to oppose Venus square Saturn, conjunct Uranus. It's like, that will be the plot twist, not just because it's the election or midterms on the 8th, but that will be the plot twist where people are going to realize, like, oh my God, I'm having like 2020 and 2021 PTSD. Like, they're doing what now? They're closing off what? Like, what's happening?
Back to back.
They're going to say it's as a result of some kind of financial crisis or shortages.
So it would be really interesting. The blowback, the pushback, the compliance, and I think we're also going to see post-Libra relationship revolutions, like a resurgence in monogamy and polyamory, and how these come at a head and how these kind of break through with Saturn and Aquarius. This is definitely preparing us for Pluto and Aqua, where things will be so extreme. I mean, Pluto Aqua brought in manifest destiny and like the whole creation of new territories.
Yeah.
So this is just going to be like the wild, wild west all over again in a few decades. So.
Yeah, but I think more so in space.
Yeah, and the internet. It's like we're moving through the digital space like we move through the wilderness in the physical. Interesting
that you brought up like polyamory, monogamy, because I feel like monogamy is more related to Taurus. It's more like possessiveness. This is mine, committed, you know, traditional. And polyamory, maybe you see more like Uranus or like Saturn aspects. So I think maybe seeing Saturn square Uranus is like a lot of people going like, does it make sense to abide by traditional values? You know, do we do this? Does it work? Does it work for us as a society? I mean, on a personal level, I believe that there is a systematic takedown to like the nuclear family. Like, I think that there is a push to, you know, have some of these gender reassignments to
weaken it.
Work, you know, on economics to the point where it's so hard to buy a house, have a family, have kids. Millennials run around in their 30s being like, oh, I don't have kids. Like it's a bragging
like
right,
prize, yeah.
And they're very prideful about not having kids. And I get it; it's like difficult to raise kids right now economically, but
I'm guilty of that.
10, 15 years from now, when people who are in their 20s and their 30s gloating about not having kids, what are you guys going to be doing when you're looking around, like still taking selfies, trying to look hot? You don't have kids. You still are renting a fucking 1-bedroom apartment.
At 40,
like, you know, so it's like, I look at that and I'm kind of like, yeah, it's difficult to have kids, but I don't want to be 40 and be like, oh, well, I got to do X, Y, and Z, but like, I'm not feeling fulfilled.
But that's the most important thing about what you said. I hate to interrupt you, but millennials are 30s now.
Yeah.
So this is the decade that's going to make or break us.
The North Node in Taurus is more traditional, but, you know, Uranus is where we push the envelope. And I've been going back and forth with this a lot. And I'm like, wow, what if, like, the most rebellious thing I could do could be to, like, settle down? Like, getting married.
So Uranus and Taurus.
Right? Like, getting married or having a
having
kid.
A farm,
or having
homesteading.
A farm. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's fucking punk rock.
Homeschooling your kids.
Yeah, but no, that's like what I've been
wild.
thinking about, being like, that's a way to say, like, fuck society. And I know that in doing that, in like 2 years' time, when Jupiter goes there, people are going to be like, please, can I buy your chickens? And I'm going to be like,
these are exclusive. Family only. Yo, but that's for real. That's legit. And, you know, it'd be interesting to see people's true colors come out, too. I think a lot of people are bogged down by social norms. They'll be able to let their freak flag fly. So, I mean, we know Uranus opposite the sun in Scorpio will be relationship heavy as well. And ending old standards to create something new. Something we haven't seen, something that's controversial.
I want everybody to think about 2021 and the Saturn-Uranus squares and what the underlining theme was, especially for those of you guys who had fixed rising signs or sun or moons. Something you've been struggling from, like, breaking free from, because it does have, like, this feeling of, like, tethering and holding you back. And we'll talk about that more in the next eclipse, but just know that, like, whatever that theme was, that breakthrough, the breakthrough is coming. It's gonna be coming at the beginning of November. And
breakthrough indeed. Oh yeah. And I think this is breakthrough of all breakthroughs. One of them.
We'll do the next eclipse next, and then as we get into like the next 2 months, like we'll also probably take it through the 12 signs and maybe talk to you guys about it a little bit more. But yeah, I wanted to put this out. Know that eclipses, we start feeling them a couple weeks prior, so it's pretty safe to say come about the 1st or 2nd week of October, you're going to be feeling this energy. Look at where Scorpio is in your chart, so you know where that fresh start is coming from. You have not had a Scorpio solar eclipse here yet. I just want to remind everybody we had a lunar eclipse in Taurus in November of 2021. We did not have a solar eclipse, right? Yeah, it was in Sag. So this is the first one. This is the first one.
And I feel like the full moon will clear everything, release everything, and then we'll start to be able to ground it, balance it. But the 2 weeks coming from that new moon,
Oh boy.
woo, just know everything that you have been taught up until this point is to prepare you for this period where you're going to need more of your mental strength and conviction than ever. 2020 PTSD vibes when it's like, am I going to make this decision and stand by this?
Yeah.
It's coming back.
Especially because Pluto is going to come back into the same degrees as when
Yeah.
Saturn was retrograde in and out, and then Pluto will enter in spring into 0 of Aquarius, where like the grand conjunction happens. So like there is going to be big 2020 PTSD vibes that are coming in the new year.
And
so
you lightly mentioned something that I think was super important for Pluto Aqua, and it's space exploration.
Yeah.
And being able to like live on another planet.
yeah.
Maybe even teleportation
Boy.
pods.
I'm interested to see what happens. Let us know, where is this eclipse taking place in your chart? Where is Scorpio in your chart? Is it hitting a personal place? Is this your birthday? If so, make sure you get a reading. Join us for one of our lives during our at Heaven podcast lives. All of the donations make it possible for us to keep making content. Leave us your comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, happy eclipsing, and we will see all of you guys very soon. Take care.